Star Trek, The Next Generation. Starfleet Academy, number 4. Capture the Flag. Chapter 3. Tuesday morning was crisp, especially at 0700 hours. Geordi could see his breath as he walked across the commons toward Transporter Room 1. It looked like bursts of blue in his infrared vision. He shivered a bit because he had followed Lieutenant Pontano's instructions to the letter. He hadn't brought anything, not even a jacket. All he wore was his academy uniform. He could see other cadets converging on the transporter room from different directions. One of them was the Neo-Pygmy, whose name he didn't even know. Geordi had never really seen how dark his own skin looked, but he couldn't imagine he was any darker than the small cadet who walked ahead of him. The Neo-Pygmy was half as tall as Geordi, and Geordi considered himself short. "Hey, wait up," he called. The small cadet looked around as if he didn't know he was being hailed. Then he finally saw Geordi jogging toward him. "Hi," he said. Geordi held out his hand. "Hi, I'm Geordi LaForge." The cadet shook his hand eagerly.
"Kareem Talo. Hey, you were really great in that game the other day."
Geordi shrugged. "I just stuck around long enough to do some good." He glanced at his watch. They were still several minutes early. "We can slow down and talk a while," he suggested, happy to make another friend.
"Okay,"
said Kareem.
"I've been meaning to ask you, are you from Africa?"
"Originally, yes," answered Geordi. "But I left when I was very young. I've heard a lot of stories, but I'm afraid I don't remember anything about it." Kareem sighed.
"We Africans like to celebrate our diversity. Can you believe I was bred to be this short?"
"Well," said Geordi, "I know the Neo-Pygmies take great pride in their heritage. After all, Pygmies are one of the oldest populations on Earth."
"Yeah,"
muttered Kareem.
"it was okay in Central Africa where there are millions of us, but in this place I wouldn't mind being your height."
"I wouldn't mind having your eyes," said Geordi. Kareem laughed.
"Okay, so we're not perfect. So what are we doing here?"
"I'm doing what both my parents did," answered Geordi. "I really can't imagine what life would be like if I weren't in Starfleet. What are you doing here?"
"Trying to prove you don't have to be tall to make it in Starfleet."
"You don't have to prove anything," said Geordi. "Just be who you are and do the best you can. That's what I keep telling myself." They reached a door marked Transport Room 1 and stopped. Other cadets hurried past them.
"You're wise, Geordi," said Kareem. "That's another reason I want to join Starfleet. I want to be wise. When I return to my town as an old man, I want the young people to look up at me and say, 'He has been places and seen things. He is wise.'"
Geordi grinned as they entered the room. "So let's go someplace and see some things." Their names were called in alphabetical order, and the cadets stepped upon the transporter platform in groups of 6. When the operator saw they were all situated, he worked the controls, and they dematerialized in columns of shimmering light. While Geordi waited for his name to be called, he noticed that some of the first-year cadets looked nervous, and he realized that the ones from Earth may not have transported before. He had been transporting all his life and couldn't imagine what they were feeling. He glanced at his new friend, Kareem, who looked slightly paler than before. "Have you ever transported anywhere?"
"Once,"
Kareem whispered nervously.
"when my family and I took a trip to Mars. That must have been 10 years ago."
"There's nothing to it," Geordi assured him. "Little tingling, that's all."
"But don't people get stuck on those things? Or melted?"
"Only when the transporter's malfunctioning," Geordi answered. Then he smiled. "And that hardly ever happens." Kareem gulped.
"Hardly ever?"
Geordi's name was called, and he stepped briskly onto the transporter. "This is more like it," he thought. "Back to the life I know, life aboard a ship." Within seconds, he was standing in a smaller transporter room with gleaming silver walls instead of the dull plaster of a building. Geordi took a deep breath and felt right at home as he stepped off the platform. He spotted a lieutenant who was checking the roster on a computer pad. "Cadet Geordi LaForge," he said to the officer. "Permission to come aboard?" None of the other 5 cadets who had arrived with Geordi had said anything. The officer nodded, clearly impressed. "Permission granted, Cadet LaForge. I see that you've been on a starship before. Welcome aboard the USS Glenn. Please exit, turn to your right, and go to the lecture hall at the end of the corridor. We'll have a briefing as soon as everyone is aboard." Geordi nodded and marched toward the door, which whooshed open at his approach. The others followed him. In the lecture hall, Geordi quickly spotted the big Andorian and took a seat beside him. "How you doing, Altos?" he asked. "Not so good." Altos bobbed his antennae and burped. "Still suffering from sauerkraut." Ew. But Geordi laughed. It felt good having friends, people he could share his experiences with. He looked around and saw a podium in the front of the room and several large overhead screens that were blank. In fact, the lecture hall looked just like a typical lecture hall at the academy, only smaller. He watched more cadets file in and look for seats. He waved to Jenna and Kareem when they entered, and he saw Jack Petty as well. The big cadet looked none the worse for being unconscious a couple nights earlier, but Geordi noticed that he kept his distance from Talara. Finally, Captain McKersey and Lieutenant Pantano entered the room. The captain touched his comm badge, and Geordi heard him say, "McKersey to bridge. Ship's complement is full. Take us out of orbit and set course for Sapphire. Warp 4. Geordi looked around and estimated that there were about 100 cadets. 32 were from his gym class, and the others were mostly third-year students, none of whom he knew. A hush fell over the gathering as a slight hum indicated that they were moving out of orbit. "Welcome aboard the Glenn," said Captain McKersey. All conversation stopped completely. "This is a Meteor-class Starfleet cruiser that has been refitted for use as a training vessel. You are aware that we have 2 entirely different groups of cadets on board. My own advanced operations class and Lieutenant Pantano's first-year physical education class. The members of my class have their assignments, and they will be taking control of this vessel as soon as we are underway." He put his hands behind his back and looked sternly around the room. "You first-year cadets are passengers. I want you to remember that. Your quarters are on Deck 3, and you are to remain on Deck 3. There's a recreational lounge on Deck 3, food slots in your quarters, and computer screens for reading. You're free to go anywhere you want, as long as it's Deck 3. The older cadets laughed, and Geordi knew they were the butt of a joke, but he didn't mind. They were Green Cadets, and they didn't have any business trying to run things. He glanced over at Jack Petty and saw the big cadet stiffening in his chair. "Patience, Jack. You'll get your turn." The captain continued. "On our return trip, we'll give the first-year cadets a tour of the ship, but for now, you must let my class do their jobs. I will dismiss my class to take their stations, and the rest of you will stay to get your cabin assignments from Lieutenant Pantano." He barked the order. "Class dismissed!" At once, 2/3 of the cadets filed out, talking cheerfully among themselves. Like most of his classmates, Geordi felt envious, but he reminded himself that he would have a chance to be a Starship crew member. He had to be patient now, and remember that he was a first-year cadet. Emma Pantano strode forward to address her class. "You heard what Captain McKersey said, and I hope you remember it. There's one thing you'll enjoy on this trip. None of you will have a roommate." There was relieved laughter, and Pantano waited until it died down. "After I give you your cabin assignment, you're to go to one of the turbolifts outside this door. Just announce your destination, Deck 3, and you'll be on your way. For your information, this hall, the transport room, and the bridge are on Deck 1. Crew quarters are on Deck 2. When you get to your room, you'll find a special uniform hanging in the closet. Try it on and make sure it fits. If it doesn't fit, hunt me down in the lounge tonight, and I'll get your replacement. Report back here at 0800 hours in the morning, wearing your new uniforms. We'll be beaming down to Sapphire shortly thereafter." Emma Pantano checked her computer pad. "Cadet Altos, cabin 301. Cadet Baker, 302. Cadet Bushima, 303. Having the last name of LaForge got Geordi assigned to cabin 314. The turbolift deposited him on deck 3, and he stepped out to find himself in the recreation lounge. It was very impressive, with numerous game tables, padded chairs, music consoles, computer screens, exercise machines, and food slots. No doubt, thought Geordi, he and his classmates would be spending a lot of time in the lounge during the next 24 hours. If they had to be passengers, at least they'd be well treated. He hurried down the corridor, anxiously looking for his cabin. When he approached the door of 314, it whooshed open. Geordi smiled, thinking of the clumsy doorknobs back on Earth. This was more like it. Everything in the cabin was standard issue. Single bed, food slot, sink and lavatory, a small dresser. It was more compact than his room at the academy, but that was all right. Geordi went immediately to the closet, curious about the special uniform that was hanging there. At first glance, there was nothing special about it. The color was brown, and the material seemed to be a bit thicker than his regular uniform. And he pulled out the tunic and couldn't believe his visor. Stuck to the front of the shirt was an electronic device. It looked like a large emblem, about the size of his fist. Strange, thought Geordi. He'd never seen anything like it. He tried to pull the device off the shirt, but saw that it was firmly attached. Geordi's visor let him get a sense of the inner workings of the instrument, but he still couldn't figure out what it was. He knew it was too complicated to be a decoration. Also attached to his shirt was a comm badge, and that made Geordi smile. It was the first comm badge he had been issued as a Starfleet cadet. He tried on the uniform, and it fit perfectly. Now, if he could just figure out what that thing on his chest was supposed to do. Geordi changed back into his regular cadet uniform and went out to the lounge. He couldn't demand a tour of the ship, but he could study its specifications. From a food slot, he got himself a glass of root beer. Then he sat down at a computer screen to read engineering manuals. Around him, cadets were listening to music, exercising, playing games, or just talking. None of them were wearing their new uniforms with the strange gizmo on the chest. He exchanged a few words with the other cadets, but he was more interested in finding out everything he could about the Glen. A few of the cadets who passed through the lounge seemed lost, as if they didn't know what to do with themselves. Geordi felt excited, but he also felt at home. He wondered why the others couldn't relax and enjoy the ride. Then he remembered what Jenna had said to him, that his upbringing made him a natural for Starfleet. Geordi had been so worried about his blindness that he never realized he was lucky in other respects. Old Boothby was right. Nobody has it easy. He turned off the computer screen and moved to a window to watch the stars blur past at warp speed. It was a familiar sight, but one that always delighted him. After a moment, he felt rather than saw a presence sit down next behind him. He turned and saw that it was the young albino woman, one of the misfits who'd been chosen last during gym class. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she smiled. She really was like a porcelain doll, thought Geordi. "I'm Geordi LaForge," he said. "Megan Craycroft." She pointed to the window. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it?" "Yeah," said Geordi. "I never get tired of seeing it." "You've made a lot of trips at warp speed?" asked Megan. Geordi shrugged. "I grew up in Starfleet. I think it's strange to look out a window and see trees." Megan laughed, a hearty sound that didn't fit her delicate appearance, and she grew serious. "I have to avoid direct sunlight because of my skin, so I think a career in Starfleet is a good choice for me." "It's interesting," said Geordi, "how everybody seems to have a different reason for wanting to join Starfleet. As a kid, you think everybody wants the same things you do. Now you see we're all different." "Speaking of different," said Megan, "what do you think of that weird thing on our uniforms?" Geordi shook his head. "It must have something to do with the combat training on Sapphire. I guess we'll find out soon enough." Megan turned her head. "Look," she said. "There's Lieutenant Pontano. Should we ask her?" Geordi turned to see the middle-aged instructor step off the turbolift. At once she was surrounded by curious cadets. He saw her smile. and shake her head. Apparently, she wasn't going to tell them anything until tomorrow. "My uniform fit," said Geordi. "How about yours?" "Like a glove," answered Megan. "I think they know exactly what they're doing. The academy doesn't make many mistakes." Geordi watched the gym instructor walk through the lounge, saying hello to her students. The word got out quickly that she was present, and more students came out of the rooms and into the lounge. In a few minutes, it was full. But Emma Pantano didn't seem to want to make a speech. She just strolled around the room until she finally sat down by herself at a music console. She put on the headphones, leaned back, and listened to music. "Well," thought Geordi, "she might as well relax too. None of us is going anywhere until tomorrow." Suddenly the ship rocked. People staggered to stay on their feet. A piercing alarm sounded, and the room began to fill with smoke. "Red alert! Red alert!" announced Captain McCursey over the intercom. "Battle stations! Battle stations!" The klaxon alarms were deafening, and smoke was pouring out of the overhead vents. The cadets screamed and shouted, rushing in every direction. Geordi jumped to his feet and looked around the lounge for Lieutenant Pantano, but she was nowhere in sight. "What can we do?" shouted Megan. The ship rocked again. "Battle stations!" announced the captain. "We are under attack!" "We've got to help them!" yelled one cadet, rushing for the turbolift. Whether they were trying to help or escape, several other cadets followed him. The turbolift doors banged shut behind them. Instinctively, Geordi looked out the window and saw that the stars were still. The ship had stopped moving. Chapter 4. Geordi's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to remain calm. He remembered countless times as a kid when danger threatened his ship or outpost, and the only thing he could do was stay out of the way. This was just another one of those times, he told himself. He got down on his knees to avoid the smoke, and after a few seconds he realized he wasn't even coughing. The smoke was thick, but apparently wasn't deadly. Geordi crawled to the window to look out. He couldn't see more than a portion of the surrounding space, but he didn't see any attacking vessels. Who would attack them anyway, this deep in Federation space? "We've got to do something," shouted Megan. "No," Geordi told her. "Just stay calm." Another cadet heard him and yelled, "But we're under attack!" Geordi looked out the window again. There were no telltale flashes of phaser fire. If the Glen was under attack, it wasn't returning fire. Geordi suddenly felt as if something was wrong, but it wasn't an attack. "I don't know what's going on," he said, "but we're not under attack. Besides, what are our orders?" "To stay on deck 3, someone answered sheepishly. "Right." He pointed to nervous cadets waiting for the turbolifts. "Get away from there!" "Listen to him," said a familiar voice. They turned to see Lieutenant Pantano striding through the smoke. She hit her comm badge and said, "Pantano to the bridge. You may stop the simulation. How many disobeyed orders?" 9, came the answer. "Shoot," muttered Pantano. She didn't look very happy. "That's worse than the last group." Geordi noticed that the smoke had stopped pouring out of the vents and the air was clearing. Also, there were no more alarms or jolts to the ship. The turbolift doors opened, and 9 very glum cadets stepped out. One of them was a Tellarite. They were followed by an ensign, who was entering their names on his pad. Lieutenant Pantano glared at the 9 offenders, who hung their heads in shame. "By leaving Deck 3, you disobeyed direct orders," she snapped. "You can be sure you'll get a demerit for it. 3 demerits, and you're out of Starfleet Academy." She turned to address all the cadets. "Things happen suddenly on a starship. There's no time to think. There's only one way you can survive. And that is to obey orders. If you don't obey orders, you can see what happens. Chaos." The instructor took a deep breath and seemed to calm herself. "I will admit the captain did an excellent job rocking the impulse engines. I almost thought we'd been hit myself. But there's no excuse for disobeying a direct order. None. Do I make myself clear?" Yes, sir, muttered 32 voices. Pontano held out her hand, and the ensign handed her the computer pad. This exercise had another purpose. Based on your actions under fire, I have selected my 4 captains for the combat games on Sapphire. She punched the names into the pad. They are Cadet Geordi LaForge, Cadet Sidra Swan, Cadet Michael Takama, and Cadet Jack Petty. Now, have any of you found that your special uniform does not fit? Nobody said anything, so Pontano nodded. I'm sure you have many questions, and I'll address them all tomorrow at 0800 hours. Don't be late, and be sure to wear your new uniforms, get a good night's rest, and whatever you do, stay on deck 3. Pontano and the ensign strode into the turbo lift and were gone. Geordi let out his breath. He didn't think he'd done anything so wonderful. He had more experience aboard a starship, that's all. But he knew that panic never accomplished anything. Geordi was more worried about what it meant to be a captain in the upcoming games. He looked around and saw Jack Petty grinning at him from across the room. Petty made a gun with his thumb and forefinger and pretended to shoot Geordi. Then he laughed and walked away. Nervously, Geordi looked back out the window. The stars streaked past at warp speed. The cadets were subdued the rest of the evening. Most of them took Lieutenant Pontano's advice and went to bed early to get plenty of rest. Geordi woke up refreshed and had breakfast in his cabin. Then he put on the strange uniform with the emblem on the chest. He was tempted to touch his comm badge to see if it was working, but he didn't want to risk getting into trouble. Even in the corridor in the turbo lift, there wasn't much talk. Everyone was thinking about the 9 cadets who'd panicked and gotten demerits. Everyone was wondering if there would be more demerits handed out before this training mission was over. It was one thing to sit in the classroom and study theory, thought Geordi. It was another thing to be tested under fire. He entered the lecture hall and took a seat beside Megan, the albino cadet. She gave him a nervous smile. The cadets filed in quietly and took their seats. Several of them studied the devices on each other's chests. Lieutenant Pontano entered the hall and took her place at the podium. All conversation came to a halt. Captain McKersey says we'll be going into orbit around Sapphire in a few minutes, she began. We'll be spending 3 days and 2 nights on the planet, living in tents. The Glen will be in orbit around the planet most of that time. There's no intelligent life on Sapphire and very little animal life, but there is a great deal of limestone in the crust of the planet. Chemical reactions with the limestone allow Sapphire to have a breathable atmosphere, even though it only has half the gravity of Earth. Pontano smiled. But this isn't a scientific expedition. We're going to Sapphire to play a game and learn something about combat, teamwork, and survival. The game you'll be playing is an ancient one called Capture the Flag. Our version involves no weapons, but it includes comm badges and a device called the coup meter. That's the thing on your chest. Coup is a French word for hit. The idea comes from the Native American belief that it requires more bravery to touch an opponent in battle and leave him alive than to fight to the death. When an opponent touches your coup meter, you are automatically transported back to the ship. You're considered captured and you're out of the game. The purpose of the game is to capture the other team's flag, which must be displayed in plain sight. It's that simple. She continued. 4 teams will be chosen of 8 cadets each. The playing field is 2 square kilometers. That sounds like a lot, but the game can cover great distances because of the low gravity. In the morning, we'll beam each team up to the ship for final instructions, and then down to an opposite corner of the playing field where they will plant their flag. Lieutenant Pontano touched her comm badge. Teams can talk to each other over a secured channel on their comm badges, but your comm badges have limited range. If you try to hail a teammate and don't reach him, he's probably been captured and returned to the ship. Comm badges are the only technology you'll have. Today, we'll just set up camp and get used to the gravity. Tomorrow, there will be 2 elimination games. The next day, the 2 winners from the first day will play for the championship. The 2 losing teams will play for 3rd place. Pantano smiled. Now, if my 4 captains will come forward, we'll choose our teams. Geordi felt embarrassed as he rose to his feet and walked down to the podium. Who was he to be captain of one of the teams? All he had done was show a little common sense when the fake attack started. Maybe, he hoped, there was a place in Starfleet for a cadet with common sense. He took his place beside the other captains, trying not to look at Jack Petty. At least, thought Geordi, I won't have to worry about being chosen last. When you are chosen, come down and stand behind your captain, said Pantano. Mr. LaForge, you make the first choice. That didn't require a lot of thinking. Zalara, he said, pointing to the slim Vulcan cadet. Petty glared at him, and Geordi tried to ignore the big cadet. The other captains, Petty, Swan, and Takama, made their first choices. They were predictable choices, the biggest and strongest cadets in the class. Now Geordi had to make his second choice, and he was stumped. Did he want the biggest and strongest, the ones who were always chosen first? Geordi smiled and pointed to the little neo-pygmy. Kareem! Everyone, especially Kareem, was surprised. Jack Petty snickered, but Kareem stuck his chest out and proudly joined as captain. The others made their choices and looked expectantly at Geordi. He didn't let them down. Megan Craycroft, he said, pointing to the delicate albino cadet. Now everyone knew what Geordi was doing, and they weren't surprised when he pointed to the chubby Tellarite as his next choice, and they weren't surprised when he picked the small purplish Saurian. Geordi smiled at his team as they assembled behind him, and they smiled back. Maybe we won't win, he thought, but at least we were handpicked. When it came time for his last 2 choices, Geordi was relieved to see that Jenna and Altos were still available. He snapped them up. Even with the stocky, dark-haired woman and the tall Andorian, his team was funny-looking compared to the others, but it was a happy team. Emma Pantano looked from one team to the other, and a smile crept over her face when she saw Geordi's team. Now, Mr. LaForge, you need to choose the color of your team, she said. Your choices are red, blue, green, and gold. Green, answered Geordi. He didn't know what it looked like to others, but it was his favorite color. Pantano nodded and took a small instrument from her pocket. She adjusted the instrument and touched it to the coup meter on Geordi's chest. At once, his shirt turned forest green. All the cadets watched with amazement as she did the same to every member of the green team. Their skins may have been many different colors, but their tunics and coup meters were all the same. They were a team. Cadet Swan chose red for her team, and their shirts were transformed into a deep scarlet. Takama chose blue, and their shirts became ocean blue. Petty was left with gold for his team, but he seemed happy with the color. With his blonde hair and gold tunic, he looked like some kind of ancient warrior. You are now teams, said Lieutenant Pantano. You'll camp together, eat together, and plan your strategy together. I won't forbid you to talk to members of the other teams, but I suggest you don't. For the next 3 days, they are the enemy. She tapped her comm badge. Pantano to McCursey. We're ready when you are. Fine, answered the captain. We've been in orbit for about 10 minutes, and the equipment and helpers are already down there. Send your first team to the transport room. McCursey out. Pantano turned to her students and added, One more thing. You can jump twice as high on Sapphire, but you still have to come down to the ground. Don't go too crazy, or you'll end up with a broken leg or ankle. Green team, report to the transport room. Geordi nodded and glanced at his ragtag outfit. Kareem and the Saurian were about the size of little kids. The Tellarite was a blimp, and most of the others were beanpoles. But they were his chosen team. Come on, said Geordi. Let's show them.